When you meet someone who's young, successful, beautiful family, someone who knows where he or she is going, you want to know more. What's the backstory? What do they believe? What did they overcome to get here? For the past decade or so, people in southwestern Pennsylvania have had their eye on tonight's guest. He's been elected to office, launched several successful businesses, and married and had children along the way. But what's his driving ambition? My special guest tonight, Jim Christiana. Please don't miss this conversation. My guest tonight is Jim Christiana. He was a standout high school and college athlete, and in his 20s, guess what he did? He defeated an incumbent to become a member of the House of Representatives. He risked it and then retired and ran for the United States Senate. And over the past few years, launched a powerhouse sports and communications enterprise that's creating jobs and giving hundreds of families in his hometown access to world-class opportunities in sports. But before he was all those things, he was delivering papers in his hometown, Beaver, Pennsylvania, and the pastor introduced him to faith in Jesus. That's where we begin the conversation tonight. Welcome, Jim, or Jimmy. It's great to see you, and tell us all a little bit about who you were back in high school and what that pastor said that changed your life.
Well, it all started with a terrible nightmare. I was about 13 years old, and I had a terrible nightmare about the world ending, and I was struggling with the finality of death, and ended up getting introduced to a pastor and a youth group at a church down the road from where we lived. And I went on a mission trip, and I kind of told the youth pastor about the struggle that I was having, and, how do you get to eternity? And he told me that to accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior and to turn my life over to him. And so I did it sitting on a floor and at a dorm room on a mission trip in West Virginia. And that was the start of my faithful journey. And at that point, I knew that the only way to have eternity is to follow Jesus. And at that point, and I'm soon to be 42 years old. I've followed Jesus as my Lord and Savior, and it's not been all easy, right? I think consistency in my faith has been with me from the beginning, but I think that spiritual maturity is the challenge. It's, living a life that is one that imitates Jesus's life. And that's where I think even in my 40s now, I'm still working on being a better steward of the blessings God has given me, and to not fall into the trap of this world of chasing personal ambition or worldly pleasures. I think that's one of the things that I'll continue to work on in my faithful journey, and been working on quite a bit lately.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's a hard thing for us as human beings, even as followers of Jesus. If you're young and you've had success early on in your life, as you have, and you find yourself as a young person in your 20s, with all the success, winning elected office and, being kind of at the height, you're there in the state capitol as a young person. It takes most people years to get there if they aspire to serving that way. But to be able to do that as a young person is almost unheard of. And you got to do all that and have that early success in your life. And yet and still, you don't seem to have been, with all the success you've had in your life, you seem to be a very, very down-to-earth, humble person, a follower of Christ, somebody who's very centered on his faith. That's a wonderful thing. But I have to imagine that along the way you've had challenges, that there have been things that have been hard for you along the way. Of course, when we read somebody's bio, it just looks like a straight line upward, all their successes are in the bio, I did this, I did that, but bios never mention what was hard for people. What have been the biggest challenges you faced in your life as a young person and even as an adult?
I think the challenge in my 20s and my 30s was which happened to be, I was in the state house from 25 years old to 35 years old. So I think the challenge at that point was trying to be in charge of my future and the personal ambition aspect, and therefore thinking that I was in control of my future and really having to surrender those personal ambitions to God's plan for me and to accept where God wanted to use me and accept what my assignment was at that time. I think after leaving politics and starting a business, obviously that was tremendously challenging, given most of my professional experience had been in the public sector. And I think you can fall into this false sense of security that um, you're more talented, to be honest, than you really are, that really we're a steward of the blessings that God gave us, and we should use those to further his kingdom. And I think I was one of the biggest challenges that I look back that I was dealing with was that I was chasing praise and affirmations from other people. I was trying to impress people, from the way I dressed to the way I talked on the house floor to the way I gave a speech. My motivation was to impress. And yes, I was young, and I think I had talents and was able to accomplish some things I was really proud of. But I think looking back, it was almost like I was a child. My faithful journey, I was a child, and falling into the traps of what children fall into, which is, they're interested in worldly pleasures and impressing either their parents or their teachers or their coach. In many ways, I was living my adult life chasing those same things. And so I think one of the biggest challenges is when you look back, and particularly from the lens of Jesus Christ and the model that we aspire to be, there's almost a depression that comes with falling short and not living up to what how we're called to live, and not being good stewards of our blessings, whether those are relationships, time, resources. That's not easy to overcome and to start trying to get better and moving forward. The one thing that I always say is, whether it's in business or sports, fitness, or in my faith, is that I'm kind of on this never ending pursuit of perfection, understanding I'm never going to get there. And it's can be unhealthy in every aspect of your life, but when it's centered on Christ and living and imitating in a way that Jesus did, that's probably the most rewarding pursuit of perfection that you can go after. But also it can leave some holes that from some mistakes that you'd made along the way, and understanding that, and that's where God's grace comes into it. And you really appreciate God's grace in those moments.
Yeah. Well, you're hitting on a bunch of really good points, because the challenges that you faced as a young person on Capitol Hill, winning the praise of people in the press and your constituents and other members of your party, and being looked to as a rising star in the party and somebody who had a bright future in the party. All that stuff is heady stuff, and it's very, very easy to lose perspective of what really matters in life and what is most important, and who it is you serve and who you follow, and what God's plan for you might be. And but you seem to have learned all that. I mean, you stepped away from your position. You ran in the U.S. Senate primary, did a really good job in the 2022 U.S. Senate primary, but you ran in the U.S. Senate primary after having served for 10 years in the state house. And yet and still, you've also been a successful business person. You've built a business that is that on the one hand is doing great things and also successful. So I mean, you're doing great things for the young people that are able to take advantage of what M7 offers, and yet and still you're also successful, which is a nice thing. But there's a verse in the scriptures that I was reading that says something to the effect of, "Count it all joy when you come across trials and tribulations, because God is using it to build your steadfastness, to build your perseverance." And it seems to me that you've learned. You're only in your early 40s, so for people like me and for many of our viewers, you're still a young person. And so but it seems like you've learned a great deal from whatever those challenges that you've had are, to be pursuing what you're pursuing now, and to be able to share what you just shared a few moments ago about how you were maybe you might have been on the wrong path when you were pursuing the praise of people and the the applause of the applause of the audience, and the admiration of your fellow elected officials. But you've grown from that, and here you are now sharing this wonderful testimony about what God has brought you through, and you seem to have the steadfastness that these trials are supposed to teach us, which means unwavering. You're not wavering in your faith. You're very firm about who you are and what you believe and who you serve.
I am, and I think that firmness was instilled in me in a young age. Like I said, that evening in West Virginia on a mission trip, um, that firmness was implanted. But to your point, that when you're in different environments and your assignment is different, the circumstances can change you. And I'll give you a good example of how the circumstances change you. In politics, not only are you getting the praise and the affirmation from, one side, you also can get sucked into this disdain or anger towards the enemy and the perceived enemy, as opposed to living the way we're supposed to live, which is to love our enemies and to serve our enemies when they're in time of need. Obviously, that's missing in politics. It's really hard in politics because from the day you get signed up, you're bifurcated into, D or R, and all is bad and all is good. And I think that's another growth point that I've seen in business, is that that is a real weakness in our system. And if we were to, even no matter, regardless of your faith, if you were to kind of read the Bible and read the New Testament of how we're supposed to live, and we try to mimic that, I think it would go a long way in um, some of the toxic environment that goes on in politics. And I don't know if I would have seen that from the outside, or from the inside. I think I did recognize it and visited, my colleagues in prison, and I tried to live that. But looking back, it's like, could I have done more to truly love my perceived enemies? They weren't even real enemies; they were just perceived or created by the ecosystem of politics. But that's one of the challenges I think in life is, and only through faith. And I think applying that faith on a daily basis, can you truly love your enemies and
Yeah.
forgive your enemies and forgive, in the private sector now, people don't bend over backwards to help you. You in business, somebody else's agenda can be very counter to yours. And something I've been working on recently, and when you have those setbacks or people kind of work against you or to do wrong to you from a business standpoint, it's so easy just to want to wage revenge on them. And I've spent a lot of time in prayer and working on trying to live on that narrow path in Matthew 7, and live more Christ-like, and that includes forgiving people and serving even your enemies.
Yeah, and how many times should we forgive according to the scriptures? One of the disciples said, "What, 7 times, Lord?" And he said, "How about 70 times 7?" I mean,
Yep.
that's
We don't stop.
we don't stop. It never stops. That's such a wonderful word, Jimmy. I mean, what you're saying is so beautiful because it's so absent from our society today. It's absent from politics. In politics, you have to take a side, and then whatever the other side says is wrong, and your side is always right. That's kind of the way it plays. And it's very, very hard to be successful on your side of the aisle if you deviate from that. If you suddenly start saying, well, actually, my colleague on the other side of the aisle has a good point, and I agree with him or her. You're inviting yourself to be primaried, in the next primary by your own party. Your own party will want to get you out of there, if you start talking that way. And yet and still, we have to remember, when our life ends and we stand before our Creator to give account for our lives, God's not going to look and say, you were a good Republican or you were a good Democrat. I mean, he's going to say, when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was thirsty, did you give me something to drink? That's what he cares about. Did you listen to me? Did you forgive people when they did stuff to you? Did you love your neighbor like you loved yourself? Did you love your enemies? And all that is that's what matters. That's what the one we follow has taught us, as you so well said in the New Testament. I mean, Jesus again and again teaches us how we're supposed to live every day, and it's a challenge in this world, to be that person. And when you do the right thing, also people aren't going to clap for you. You find, if you do the right thing in business or you do the right thing in politics, and that is the Christian thing, you may not get applauded. As a matter of fact, you may lose your seat or your position. But who do we serve and who do we follow? And who's on the throne? Tell me about M7 Sports.
So M7 Sports, M7 comes from Matthew 7 and specifically 13:14, where we're encouraged to seek a narrow path and to enter through the narrow gate that is taken by few and avoid the broad path taken by most. So what's the broad path? The broad path is the way everyone else does it, and the worldly approach. And that narrow path, which is much more challenging and tougher, is to live your life in a way that Jesus Christ lived, with your faith being the guiding light of that, not of the worldly pleasures. And so that's where Matthew 7 came from. And that was kind of our mission statement from the beginning, that we were going to love the people we work with, whether internally or externally. We were going to love what we do, and we were ultimately going to serve in a faithful way. And we started as a communication marketing firm, and along the way, we saw an opportunity in sports to apply that same principle to sports, and we built a sports complex that opened last August to serve the community. It was, I think, an opportunity to provide a facility that provided first-class sports, but did it in a way that was focused on serving the people of this community. And by the grace of God, and truly by the grace of God, we were able to open last August and start to fulfill that mission. And it's been a remarkable opportunity, I think, to provide a service and to provide a facility, but really to build a culture that looks at each individual kid that comes through here as an opportunity to serve them. That's our customer. And along the way, introduce them hopefully to Jesus, and introduce them to a life of fulfillment that is beyond sports. And I think that's the trap in sports. I love sports. As you mentioned, I grew up playing sports. But the kid's identity is not in their athletic ability. And I think the younger we can introduce kids to the fact that their identity is not on their performance on the athlete, as an athlete, or on the court or on the field, the better they will be for life. And unfortunately, that's one of the challenges with the youth sports boom right now, is that there's an epidemic in mental health with young folks, and statistics show that that's even harder for athletes in this day and age. And so we can't be in the youth sports business and not recognize the negative consequences of being in youth sports, which is the mental health, which is the decline of the family, the financial consequences of youth sports these days. And so we're setting out to be a facility that recognizes that we want to help strengthen athletes, their mind, their body, and their brand, for when they go on to hopefully play in college or do whatever they want to do after life, but to get them thinking of themselves as a brand. And that's not a dirty word to us, because when you have a brand, you want to protect that brand and promote it. You understand that your actions have negative and positive consequences. These are all lessons that I think kids at a young age, if they can learn, will be in a better position for a successful, fulfilling life. And success not from making money or a job, but from happiness and a sense of purpose that's beyond sports.
Well, my guest tonight is Jim Christiana, former state representative and CEO of a thriving sports enterprise in Western Pennsylvania. We're learning about the incredible way God's been leading him and his team at M7. We'll be right back.
You're watching Joe Watkins' State of Independence on Lighthouse TV. Positively different. Share your comments about today's program in the comment box at joewatkins.org.
Welcome back to State of Independence. If you missed this episode in full, watch it anytime on the free Lighthouse TV app, available on your favorite app store. Now, Jimmy, there's quite a bit of evidence suggesting that millennials and Gen Z kids are far more curious about spiritual things. I mean, they've got big questions. They're reading the Bible, exploring what they believe. You work with a lot of young people, obviously. Do you think they're getting any answers, especially when it comes to sports?
I think they're getting closer to finding truth. And that's what I ultimately think the younger generation is seeking in this day and age with so much information at them. They're seeking truth. And when you're seeking truth and answers, the ultimate place to find those answers, whether you're 18, 25, or 42, or 52, or 82, is to go to the Bible. And I think when you focus in on becoming a student of the Bible, you will find out that there is truth there that is so refreshing and rewarding. And so I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think we should celebrate the progress that is being made. But I also think we should be challenged and a leader in trying to bring as many folks to truth and faith as we possibly can.
Yeah. Well, that's a blessing. I mean, how do you advise kids in a day when, for a lot of kids who may not come from affluent families, they see how much money can be made in professional sports. And of course, everything that glitters isn't gold, and it's not all that it appears to be. I mean, we know that in professional athletics, it's just the few people at the very top that make the huge incomes, and that there are a lot of people that make more modest incomes as you go down in sports. So it's just not everything that it may seem to be. But how do you advise young kids whose eyes are kind of glistening because they see dollar signs from professional sports?
Yeah, and the dollar signs are now even in college sports too, right?
That's right.
And
That's right.
NIL and NIL going to high school. So now I think kids are seeking a financial reward for sports, and some families are seeking a return on their investment at a young age. So the first thing my approach is to be present. And to be present and try to get them to understand that even if you're Tom Brady, there's life after sports. At some point, your life as an athlete is going to end. And having them understand that, I think, will help us get to the point of them having a realistic perspective, as opposed to the damage or the consequence of when they get to that point and realize, just similar to politics, right? I saw this in politics. The moment that I left politics, a lot of the glitz and the glamour and the shine of that life is over from the minute. And I think letting kids know that ultimately they are more than just an athlete, I think opens up the door to having conversations about the other piece. But it's also being present when they get there, or they have setbacks of injuries and they inevitably fail. It's one of the beautiful things about sports is that you're going to fail eventually. And those same folks being there to help you through that phase, I think goes a long way with kids.
Yeah. Well, so incredibly well said. My guest tonight has been the CEO of M7, a sports and communications organization doing some wonderful things in southwestern Pennsylvania. Jim is out of politics right now, but is very much a public servant still, and just doing an awesome ministry. Thank you so much, Jim. I'll be right back with our great producer, Jeff Coleman.
Learn more about Joe Watkins and the mission of this program at joewatkins.net. And tell Joe what you thought about today's program in the comment box.
And now let's talk to our great producer, Jeff Coleman.
I guess there's something magical about entering your 40s because you have just enough room to look back and see how God works. And you get a sense that, as Jimmy was talking about, your self-directed ambitions aren't the point. They're not the plan. And as much as you want to try to snap your life into some kind of a grid that at this age I'll be this age I'll be that, and you create this energy around you that you want to project because that's how things happen, you think. But what Jim, just in knowing him for many years now and watching his life become more and more and more dependent on God for the next steps, less and less self-assured about what he should be doing next or what he should be looking at, is such an encouraging thing. What a great example.
Yeah, it's really helpful to, I think, everybody watching, to see how God is using him and to see how his narrative has changed.
Yeah.
And who he serves, who he follows. And I love what he's doing with these young people. I mean, I just think that's just invaluable.
That's a 40,000 square foot facility that has, whenever those doors are open, there's just a perpetual line of cars and minivans and SUVs and people of all different economic backgrounds and all different life experiences. But not only to be able to find the rules of the game, but then it was fascinating. Jim entered into this conversation with you about a brand. The brand is not a dirty word. Because there is, I think, something dirty about the idea that a brand for the sake of having a brand, being famous, having a big name, I think that's a low bar and a wrong bar to set. But as he defined it, was interesting, which was that the brand is about consistency over time, looking at your life and saying, I really meant what I said when I said, as he has, I follow Jesus, or I really meant what I said, that my life is not defined by the game, but by the way I play, by my ability to walk away from the game and not have your life collapse. What he is doing there is preparing people for the day when you no longer play the game.
Yeah.
And the rest of life begins. And you are not defined at 50 or 60 or 70 by the records you set in high school. That's really important.
Yeah.
So I love what they're doing. I love what M7 is doing. I love what Jimmy's doing. And very encouraging to me, who never played sports a day in his life.
Yeah, well, it's a good message for all of us, actually. A really good message for all of us. Jim Christiana came to faith because someone shared the good news of Jesus. Maybe that's just what you needed to hear to give the young person in your life that same life-transforming news. So don't hesitate. It may be the most important conversation you'll ever have. If you have a question or comment, send me a message in the comment box at joewatkins.org. Don't hesitate. I'd love to hear from you. From America's first capital, Philadelphia, I'm Joe Watkins, and for Jeff Coleman and the entire team behind the cameras at Lighthouse TV, thanks so much for watching. God willing, we'll see you again next week. That's a good story. It's neat to see people when they're out of politics and when they don't have to worry anymore about pleasing folks, and pleasing the base.
Yeah. What would you do if you didn't have to ask for a vote?
Yeah.
I mean, how would you live?
That's right.
If it did not depend on whether or not you would win the next election? That is the question you have to ask people in politics.
Yeah.
Like, how would you live if it didn't depend on voting?